I wanted to start by talking about your collaboration together as writers, Rashaad and Zora, since the two of you had worked together previously on a short film, but this was your first project as co-writers, and what the genesis of wanting to put together a feature film initially was and work together in this way.
Sure. So, yeah, I made a short film when I was at NYU Graduate Film School called Premature, about a young woman who gets pregnant when she's 14 and how she has to deal with it in her family and community. I had known Zora since she was 11 years old and cast her in that film when she was 14. And she was phenomenal in this short, and hopefully it'll be on DVD when it comes out, so you guys can check it out. But yeah, for the last few years, we had been talking about collaborating again. We just didn't know in what capacity. And a couple of years ago, we decided to write something together. And we got into a room. She had a month off from acting school. And we said, you know, we wanted to make a love story. You know, we had asked ourselves like what we felt was missing in current day Black cinema, and felt like there was such an overabundance of films that had to deal with Black victimization and fear, Black pain, suffering, and death. And we wanted to contribute something to the other side of that equation and explore our lives and our loves instead. And so, thanks. And while we were drafting that, themes from the short film Premature, settings, characters, world, began to creep into our writing process, and we embraced those elements, and the two just kind of melded together.
And what was your style in terms of the way that you would write together and collaborate on the script? Were you always in the same room together? Were you sending pages back and forth?
So I was in grad school at the time when we were writing, so we actually didn't, and I went to grad school in California. We both live in Harlem. I'm from Harlem, and so we didn't have that much time in the same physical room. So there was communication that was happening kind of when I would go back to school and then come back on breaks again. But that first month that Rashaad was talking about, we just spent a lot of time talking about, yes, what we wanted to write, but just also, it's one thing to know each other as friends. It's another thing to know each other as writers. You're kind of vulnerable in a new way as a writer working. A lot of us writers don't work with other people. It can be very solitary. So to do that alongside another creator, we kind of had to get to know each other in that way, and that meant bringing into the room what inspires us individually, and that was watching a lot of film and listening to a lot of music, and then a lot of storytelling, kind of. Rashaad and I are just a tad bit removed from 17, so we
barely.
So we did have to, and we had to go back there. We had to talk about what it was like being 17, growing up in New York City and spending summertime in New York City and falling in love in New York City for the first time and having your heart broken in New York City for the first time. And those are parts of our lives that we had not until that point known, even though we had known each other for so many years. So part of the writing process was really this deep dive into getting to know the other person.
What was it that led you both to land so specifically on it being that age of 17 and right before you leave home?
I think we wanted Ayanna to have the most, we wanted to give her the biggest chance at a transformation. And I think at that specific moment in your life where you are caught between childhood and adulthood, we thought was a good period of time to explore.
Mm-hmm. And also just, we always want high stakes when we're writing, because that's what makes us lean in and invest in characters, are high stakes, life or death. That's what makes us, latch on. And when were the stakes higher than 17?
And for you, Michelle, what were the ways in which Rashaad and Zora helped you really find the depth and the history of your character on screen for your portrayal?
It was interesting because we all three live in Harlem. Yeah. So Harlem was, when I read the script, it was obviously another character in the script. And I've raised a daughter in Harlem. Mm-hmm. And it felt, it was just very familiar. And it was, the writing is so human. Yeah. It's so accessible. Yeah. It was very familiar.
Yeah. And you guys, it looks like you worked very clearly to make sure that all the dialogue feels very naturalistic. Yeah. Did you have a process when you were writing and reading it back to make sure that it always had that feel to it?
I mean, that's the fun part, you know, is to hear those voices in Harlem that we grew up with, and putting them on a page. It's a lot of fun. I guess when we had the readings and stuff, when the actors put it in their mouths and they embellished a little bit on the side, you know, yeah, it helped us kind of hone in and you know, keep each other accountable and say, okay, well, that didn't sound right, or that didn't sound like quite human. So, you know, we finessed it as a result of hearing it aloud.
And because you're all talking about how much Harlem obviously plays into the movie, and it really feels like a central character in the film as well. How did you work to make sure that you were really expressing that to audiences, whether they're already familiar with Harlem or someone's watching it in the middle of the country and hasn't necessarily visited before?
I guess we know that, you know, there's a Harlem that's usually portrayed in cinema that's not the Harlem that we know. And we're from a very specific section of Harlem. You know, it's like West Harlem. It's not like Lenox and 125th or anything like that. You know, it has a little bit more of a neighborhood feel to it. And so, you know, we're in love with our little corner of Harlem, and wanted to put it on screen. And you know, we used every resource that was available to us. So we shot. You know, Isaiah's apartment is my apartment. You know, the records in his apartment are my dad's records that he left to me. You know, the park is the park around the corner. The streets that we use are right outside, you know, our place. And Zora and I live on the same physical block in Harlem and have for the last 15 years. So, you know, we use the restaurant and the laundromat, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like very much like a 4-block radius because of budgetary constraints and location constraints. So, you know, we basically used what we could, and we knew, I mean, yes, it's a love letter to Harlem to some extent, but I don't know if that was like the point we were trying to make. We were just talking about two people in love, and this just happens to be where they were.
Yeah.
But it's so specific.
Yeah.
It's beautifully specific.
It is. And then also, I feel like when people are making a film on an independent budget and there are those restraints in place, people tend to keep a film in much fewer locations, but you're really out there on the streets, making sure that you're representing the community. So what were some of the logistical challenges in terms of pulling together all those locations and making sure that you really captured everything?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it like was need. You know, in the script writing phase, you know, we didn't want to just put everything inside one room. You know, we wanted to, you know, give you sort of a breadth of experience, and so we wanted to have scenes on the train and in the nail salon and in the different friends' homes and stuff. So, but yeah, in the actual shooting of it, you know, there are a lot of challenges. You know, we didn't have a lot of budget for locations. And sometimes we would lose locations the day before, a couple of days before, and we had to remain flexible and call audibles while we were in the middle of shooting. The first day we shot was actually the day prior to the first day on the production schedule, because we were going to use that day for rehearsal. But we were like, the morning of, I was like, oh man, the Caribbean Day Parade is in Brooklyn today. That would be a really nice production value for this small little film. Like, you know, so Zora and Josh, are you guys available today to like run out to Brooklyn? And we called the costumer, and, you know, we got them in their costumes, and we shot on film. So we had to get the camera truck out to Brooklyn and meet us to load the film. And we caught the very like tail end of the Caribbean Day Parade. And just, that was Isaiah. Josh and Zora didn't really know each other that well, and we were gonna at least use that one day of rehearsal before they got into these intimate scenes and stuff like. But, you know, we just threw them out there and said, you know, go be in love, and they were just so game. You know, they were just so game. I was really blessed to have such passionate and dedicated performers.
And then for you, Zora, there's always such a unique thing being an actor in a film that you've also had such creative agency in terms of crafting that character and the ability to craft a character that you know that you can play that really plays into your strengths. And I'd love if you could talk about that process and how it feels different to coming into a project where you're just given a script and that's what you're working with.
Well, I felt like I had a leg up because I knew Ayanna well. And given the fact that we did not have as much rehearsal time, it did help that I kind of knew, I was there for, we built her together. So her backstory and the little nuances and intricacies of character, we talked about them a lot. So I had that, and that made that part of that process unique versus a character that somebody else has written and you're coming to live inside. And then in terms of how that played out in production, Rashaad and I kind of said very early that this is a film that we'd write together. He would be directing and I would be leading. And then there was also a conversation about when we got to production that he would be directing and I would be leading. And I think it was very important to honor that on set because it's not just him and I on set. There's a whole other wonderful cast and a crew and a lot of people looking, for direction, what's for leadership. And we wanted to honor and respect that. So conversations that had to do with the script or had to do with some of these choices that had to be made on the day about changing location, rewriting things, weren't either happened when we were wrapped or before we started shooting or kind of when we were on a break, but that we really tried to honor so I could do the work that I needed to do, that when we are shooting, I'm acting and he's directing, and a lot of that is based in trust, of course, that you have to, that I trusted, of course, him with the vision because we created it together. So I can't see what I'm doing. I can't see what anybody else is doing. I'm not looking at the monitor. I'm in it. And had to give myself over in that way, as we all do as actors on a project.
Yeah. And I read something that you initially had a little bit of hesitation about making Ayanna a writer and a poet, and what made you come around on that and decide that that was a really important central piece to who she was?
I didn't come around to it until I saw it. The script that we went into production with, Ayanna was always a writer. We knew that about her, but there was no actual verse. There was no poetry written into the script, and I was very resistant. And I think my hesitation had to do with the representations of poetry or spoken word that I had seen in film, and that is a world that I am of. So kind of feeling protective of it as well, just not wanting to do it on this project. And again, the trust and Rashaad, we were like, all right, so it's not in the. I thought it wasn't in the draft, and it wasn't, and we didn't shoot any of that until one day on set, and it's the scene where Ayanna is, for the first time, going to share her writing with Isaiah. And in that draft that we went into production with, that's where the scene ends. Cut to a new scene. So she's just about to open her mouth. Cut to a new scene. No poetry. But on the day, Rashaad was like, well, we're here. Why don't you just say a little poem?
We're gonna stop the camera.
Yeah, we're gonna roll because we might use it for editing and cut back and forth, like montagey stuff. But just do a poem, trust. So I did, with full confidence that it would never be in the film.
Boom.
Saw the first cut and whole poem in film, and it was so right. And that is. That's I think the beauty of creating something with others is that you don't know it all. Sometimes other people's sight and their vision can really be beautiful if you lean into it. And that's in part to, I don't know if Rashaad was conspiring the entire time and always knew there was going to be poetry in the film, but also our editor Justin Chan, he showed Rashaad that, and then I saw it, and it now I can't we can't imagine the film without it. But that was the only time that there was, in that cut, that was the only time that we saw or heard any of Ayanna's poetry. So now it felt very unique and kind of like it didn't belong in the film. And that's where the request for more poetry in the editing process came in. So, Ra and Justin in the editing room calling me up like, hey, maybe another couple of lines of poetry, put it somewhere else, and maybe just a few more over here. Could you just get it to us tomorrow? But that's, it's a cool little fun thing that we get to take away from this project, that the film that we wrote had no poetry in it. And the film that we made obviously wouldn't be this film without the poetry.
Absolutely. I also feel like from a really interesting standpoint, that speaks to you as a director and the way that you remain flexible and you have an idea of the film you're making and who these characters are. So how is it important to you to be able to always pivot that even once you're in production for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remain flexible. You know, you have performers with different talents, and you have to rely on them. You know, if there's somebody who I know can do a backflip or stand on their head, you know, that might be cool in the background of a scene or something. I don't know until you're there and you're on your feet and you have to, you know, you're in it. Sometimes inspiration, you know, strikes you and you just, you know, ask for things and. Yeah, I mean, when Michelle came into the casting office, there was that scene where she discovers that Ayanna's pregnant, and in that scene originally we wrote like maybe 2 words. It was like, "Oh, Ayanna," you know, something to that effect, and on the day. Michelle didn't say that in the room. I don't know if she went up or something, but it was just so powerful without the language. It was just like she just looked at Zora, who was in the casting room as well, and it was just like, man, that scene had never been better. So, you know, I cast Michelle immediately, you know, and said, you know, like that. Do we just cross that line out? You know, we just said like, yeah, just do it like you did in the audition, and it was just that just being open to like you're not always right. You know, the script is a blueprint, and you're like you write it one time when you're writing it, you write it another time when you're directing it, and you write it the third time when you're editing it. So. You just have it's a living organism that you're constantly molding and trying to make better.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful and telling scene about your character, Michelle. And I love how much it tells you about their history as a mother and a daughter. So how did you think about their relationship in that way and the way that informed your performance that we get to see on screen?
I am a single mother, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's brutal. And beautiful and challenging and rewarding and just everything that entails when your young daughter tells you she's pregnant. Yeah. It's just, you just know what's in front of her, you know, and all of the fear and, you know, if she had decided to keep the baby, her mother would have been the main one loving up on that child. But just in that moment, when someone tells you and you had so many hopes for them and they were going to get out, you know, and I decided that she had gotten pregnant, you know, when she could have had an opportunity to go to college. It was just seeing your future model mine is just terrifying, just terrifying. And in my defense, I did not realize there were other lines. And I remember the camera was still holding, and so I'm still looking, and I'm like, okay, well, we're just gonna live this. All right. So.
Yeah, and she probably just felt us just staring at her, just going.
You know what I mean?
Like,
and I was
wow.
like, so we're in it. We're gonna stay here.
Yeah, we were very, very blessed to have Michelle's Broadway
Right across
actor
the street,
and
Sweat. Studio 54.
Yeah.
Tony nominated.
Tony nominated, Obie Award winning actress to really ground our little film that had, you know, a lot of young performers who hadn't been in films before, a few non-actors as well. To have somebody of Michelle's caliber, we were really just blessed to have her.
Beautiful.
Would you think about that working with both very well-trained and highly trained actors and non-actors who were coming into this the first time in the way that you would communicate with them? Or was it really the same language that you were using with all of your actors on set?
I mean, I have to, you know, mold to each performer. You know, sometimes you'll have a child on set or, you know, yeah, everybody needs different things. And it's my responsibility to, you know, but, you know, the folks who hadn't acted before, if they're part of an ensemble, they're communicating with each other when the camera's not rolling. So it does start to feel like a family. And so when you ask for things, it's flexible. It's not always like so stagey.
Rashaad is a very generous, grounded, and kind leader. You feel like you can say anything to him, and there's an openness he has, but you at no point think that you can run over him, or you always feel like you have a leader in charge, but there's a gentility that you have. That's really quite lovely.
Thank you.
I love it. And then for you, Zora, obviously there's a lot of beautifully intimate scenes with Ayanna and Isaiah. And I was curious, like, what Rashaad did as a director to make sure that you both always felt really comfortable shooting those scenes on set.
I think Rashaad was more uncomfortable than anybody else was, to be honest. Actually one of those first intimate scenes between Ayanna and Isaiah, we shot on the second day of shooting. So there was, yes, of course, there's a bunch of nerves. It's something that I had never done before. It's something that Joshua had never done before, and we talked about it in the dressing room beforehand. But we all knew what was coming, and because we just had the most supportive cast and also crew that was on set, because it was a close set those days. There was just a lot of care. All of us taking care of one another. I remember there was this moment on that first day, because you got a robe and then you don't, and it's like, this is about to happen. We're about to do this, and we both looked at each other like, but we wrote this. We knew that this was happening. We wrote this scene. So we knew that it was happening, but I think once, because there's a number of them in the film, and once we kind of got past the first one, and it was okay, and everybody was okay afterwards. And again, shout out to Joshua Boone for just, his performance, beautiful, but also just really being the kind of co-star that really takes care and make sure, like, he was, are you good? Making sure that I was good. And to everybody who was on that set, shout out to Laura Valadao, who was right there. But it was wonderful having a woman DP that helped. And then, of course, to Rod, just, making sure everyone was taken care of, but also making sure that we got what we needed to get. Yeah. And sometimes that takes time. Yeah. So it wasn't rushed. I think the whole thing was about taking the time that it needed, honoring those moments.
That's beautiful. And I love, from a directorial standpoint, the pacing of the scenes where they're together. It really feels, when you're watching it, like time just stands still. Mm-hmm. So how did you think about how you wanted the pacing and the camera work to really just linger and capture this developing relationship for all of the characters on screen?
With Laura Valadao, my DP, we had talked about differentiating the shooting strategy when she's with her friends or when she's at home, as opposed to when she's with Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And Isaiah, there's the long scenes where they're talking, that everything slows down for her, that she feels more settled with him. So we try to approach it more visually. We wanted it to be a little bit more steady. Things to take place in longer shots. And so, and when she was with her friends and on the subway and at home, we wanted a little bit more frenetic, and so you to feel the vibrancy of Harlem and youth. And with Isaiah, he's a little older, sort of slow it down with the jazz and all of that. So we always thought that the lovemaking scenes will have some slow motion in there, and then with the long dates and such, we'll let things play out in real time on camera. Just let them talk, and not try to do too much to it. Especially because we were sort of rushing for this Sundance deadline as well. So we knew that we couldn't give too many options to the editor in the editing room. So he's just, so he was like overwhelmed and couldn't put the cut together. But also we were shooting on 16 millimeter film. And so we wanted to get the biggest bang for our buck. We couldn't have too many setups and too many angles. We had to be very, very selective and very economical about how we approach the shooting.
And then for both of you, Michelle and Zora, how did that impact the way you thought about your performances, knowing that there was going to be slightly less coverage and less setups, and you really had to kind of nail it in a fewer takes, probably, I imagine, as well?
I don't know that ever came into play. It just felt very organic. The relationship, the dynamics, you know, the conversations. So there wasn't this thought like, am I doing enough? Am I getting enough? I knew these women, you know. So.
I think in a way, at first there was a little bit. It was a little anxiety-inducing. Once it was, once I learned what it meant to shoot on film, but then afterwards, that kind of transformed into it was freeing, because it was what it is what it's going to be, you know, and that kind of opens something up. I think as a performer, that you just, you live in it as much as you possibly can, and then you let it go.
And that's very theatrical, right? You only get that second, it's gone, you got to move on. So, coming from the theater.
I love it. I'd love to jump into a couple of questions as well that we got from the audience. This one is from Lisa, for you, Zora and Michelle. What makes you most excited in an audition as actors still?
Excited?
Yeah.
Michelle's not out here auditioning.
I do, actually. Someone said to me, Chicago was my creative home. I'm from Detroit. I went to Michigan. I went to New York, and was only here for like a year right out of college. And then I went to Chicago for my brother's wedding, and I ended up getting a gig and staying for 7 years. And I remember very early on, it was an older actor who was like, you got to think about auditions that you got to act today. You know, it's not that you get the role or you don't. You just get some material and you get to sink your teeth into it and just leave it all out there. So that has always been the mentality. I got to act today, no matter what, no matter if I'm not right for it. You can't control any of that shit. But what you can control is just sinking your teeth into something, you know, and leaving it all on that floor.
Yeah. How about for you, Zora? How do you like to approach walking into that room?
That, and I'd say the levity of, because when you book the role, then you got to do the role and get the notes and hear the reviews and be in process. When you do an audition, you just get to do the thing
decide.
and leave.
That's right.
And then if you do get you will have a choice to make. So yeah.
And then this next one is for you, Rashaad, from Michael. How different was the process in bringing this film from idea to the movie theaters from Gun Hill Road, your earlier feature film?
Which is beautiful.
Hey, man. How different was it? How different was it to?
Just the process of getting the film made and going through that festival journey and getting it into theaters.
Yeah. Yeah,
Small question.
It was a little different. With Gun Hill Road, it was my first feature, but it was the funding process was sort of unheard of, because I had done Premature, the short film, and I'd done another short, and I kind of had the ball rolling a bit on the festival circuit. And so when I wrote my thesis film, Gun Hill Road, I knew I was going to make it by any means necessary, you know, but I was asked to lunch by a producer friend of mine who we had acted together. I forgot to mention that, room full of actors, but I was an actor first. So we acted it together in a show in Harlem, and he went on to start producing films, and I went to film school to start directing them. And he asked me out to lunch one day. Hey, you know, what's next for you? I was like, well, I'm working on my first feature. I'd like to help you out with that. He read the script, and then he was like, great, let's do this. And that was the funding story, which is, I knew after being in this film about a decade now, that it doesn't usually happen like that. You know, I went from, you know, with Gun Hill Road, like I would have made it for, you know, whatever I had on my credit card and the grants for $50,000, and it became, you know, then I was able to go to Isai Morales and Judy Reyes and all these actors, and it became a bigger thing. where we had a location manager and we got to, dress locations from scratch. Yeah. That did not happen this time. Like, Gun Hill Road opened up some opportunities in television for me. So I've been directing episodic television for the last 6 years. And but I've been really itching to make another feature. And I've written a couple of scripts over that time. But when you direct episodic television, it's not your baby. You walk away from that editing room and they can do whatever they want to with that episode. And so I was like feeling sort of this lack of ownership, and I was like, wait a minute, why did I start this thing? Oh, that's right, yeah, storytelling. So with Premature, I knew that going in, if the last 6 years, because I hadn't made a film, it might be a little bit more difficult to raise financing for this, that we should write it in such a way that if push came to shove, I'd be able to make it anyway. And so push came to shove. And, I'm also a very impatient person. I think, I spent 3 years as an actor in these regional theaters, and I was like, it's not happening. I'm going back to film school. And likewise with this, I was like, we went out to the production companies and there was a lot of interest, but no one was signing a check because, we didn't have any stars attached or anything like that, or any, current stars. But I was like, I'm impatient. I don't want to wait till next year. I want to wait till we get $1 million. I don't want to wait. Let me just take the money I've been saving for with this TV money, and let's just make another movie. So I did that, and I had a friend, help from a dear friend of mine, Susan Kalechi Watson, who I went to NYU with, and Cinereach was a grant organization that helped us out as well, and Kodak was very generous and gave us a discount on stock and processing as well.
It's amazing. And then this last question is for all of you guys. What are your thoughts, if any, on some of the current and existing films centering on Black love out in there? Because it feels like, there's a history of it. We've got a couple of films that are coming out, like Photograph just came out this week.
It's beautiful, it's charming. I read the script. Okay. It's got a charming, and it's not traumatic. Yeah. There's the trauma is very human. Yeah. Love, loss, and what it could have been. Yeah. But, I just think it's a time now where it's so dark. Mm-hmm. And we just want to figure out how to fall in love and make shit work and do right by each other. Do you know what I mean? It's just so dark right now, and we're just seeing the worst of each other. Yeah. And so let love win, whatever that means,
I think that's a beautiful, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, Zora and I, we grew up watching these, Love Jones and Love and Basketball and, these films of the 90s. And we just, we come to identify ourselves through the images that we see on screen, how we're represented. Mm-hmm. And we understand the impulse to explore different kinds of cinema, but for some reason we were just like, there are two different approaches to gaining empathy. One is to show how different our lives are from yours, and to show how we suffer and that you should feel sorry for us. And then there's another approach. It was just like, our lives are exactly the same as yours. The characters just happen to have brown or black skin, but, hopefully you can identify, and relate to what these characters are going through, because you yourself have gone through very similar things.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say one thing? Yeah. Zora is an amazing writer in not only the medium of film, but she has a play. And it's gorgeous. It's up in New York City right now. You can catch it through Saturday. And it's called Stew. And it's beautiful. And also Joshua Boone is up at MCC right now and all the Natalie Portmans. And it's just such talented people, you know.
I mean, every single one of you has done such a beautiful job in crafting and telling this film, and thank you so much for coming out today and sharing it with us. It's out in cinemas this Friday, February 21st. Please tell all of your friends to go support this movie. Thank you.